Well, hello, everybody. My name's Paul Bakken. I first got involved in analog space things because I saw an advertisement for the MDRS and they were looking for crew members. And as a 40-something-year-old, I decided I want to do that. So I became a part of a crew, and through that, I started meeting more people like you who like to do cool space things. Yeah. And so I just continue to hang out so I can do more cool space things.
That's nice. So my name is Leszek Orzechowski. I'm a Polish architect. I am a PhD candidate, and I was investigating analog habitats, and I built one. So Lunar Research Station in Poland is something that me and my team Space is More designed and are operating. So I participated in 3 of those missions, but we organized more than 20 of them. And well, I guess I would love to visit other habitats and experience different analog experiences, but I guess those people will fill the gaps for me for today.
Hi there, real quickly, my name is Ryan Kobrick. I work for Paragon. Analogs and me have been together for 2 decades now. I've been involved with a number of them, as we'll see in some upcoming slides. And just the ability to contribute, even at a smaller scale, to the larger picture of human exploration, I find is really important, where we can learn a lot of lessons. And as this panel is titled, Our Humanity to Space, and I'm sure we will pull Jessica in for comments with everyone, so make sure we find her at dinner time, because that obviously is part of our representation of space. So that was, but we have an awesome pinch hitter here, so I think we're in good hands.
Hi, I'm Gal from Israel. I arrived into the analog environment in a coincidence. I've been serving the Israel military and the special forces, specializing in extreme environments. Also been deploying after the military service in lots of disaster areas, conflict zones, providing humanitarian aid and development projects. And the director of DMARS in Israel once approached me and asked me to join an analog mission, and from there the route was quite fast, turning into a training director in DMARS, then building a new habitat, participating in AMAD 20 of the Austrian Space Forum, managing the project, and now a team leader in the Austrian Space Forum.
Thank you. Hi, so my name is Dr. Benjamin Pothier. I'm French, obviously. I'm a fellow international at the Explorers Club, and I'm a human factor expert for the Human Spaceflight Committee of the IAF. I mainly started as an extreme expedition documentarian, going to places like the high Arctic or the Himalayas. I ended up meeting people who participated to analogs. And 2 weeks ago, it was my 6th analog at MDRS, and I'm also freshly back from UND Aerospace. I had an amazing week, and that's it.
And through the power of STEM, Dr. Mark Nelson, if you could introduce yourself.
Yeah, and tell me if I can be heard. I think we're having problems.
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, great. Anyway, 20 years of working with my Institute of Ecotechnics, where we had a modest aim of changing the human biosphere paradigm, led me to be a director of Biosphere 2. And it was actually an extraordinary 24 hours I spent in the Biosphere test module, which is now a core part of SAM. That was so amazing that I decided to join the candidate Biospherians and was lucky enough to go into Biosphere 2 for 2 years.
Amazing, right? So I'm going to start the questions. As we look at these 3 images, the image of the Earth through the copula, the image of the Earth in the moon perspective, and the image of the Earth in the perspective of Mars. This actually was given to us by Jessica, but since Jessica isn't here, seeing these perspectives, what does that tell you about humanity, or what should we think about when we think of humanity? Yes.
I have to think of what Jessica would say.
Yeah.
But you can see every time we change our perspective, we look at new things. Or you're looking at an old thing in a different way. And so you begin to ask new questions and learn new things. And sometimes it's only by changing your perspective that you can learn the next new thing that's going to lead you to a better understanding of not only yourself, but our planet and who we are as a species.
How I can follow that? I have no idea. That was very, very beautiful. Yeah, Jessica would be proud. But that's really true. When I look at those photos, I see, that there is something always new to see over the horizon. Sometimes that's literally your home. When you are closing inside a habitat, for example, in ours, we are an isolation facility, so you are having this perspective inwards. You are not looking outside. You are not experiencing the world around you. You are trying to understand yourself. And so, for me, in order to go there, you need to go both ways. You need to understand your surrounding, see the broader perspective, but also you need to understand yourself. And this is why those analogs are also important.
Just to add that, I know that Jessica brought this to our attention because as you move further away, it becomes more and more important of bringing humanity with you further out into the cosmos. So that's really what these pictures are representing, is that you can see Earth, you can see home, you can see the Great Lakes, which is homes for me. And as you move further away to the moon, it becomes smaller and smaller. So it becomes more and more important that we actually bring our best with us. And that goes across the board, from talent to just how we perceive everything and how we want to build the future in space.
Well, I was about to say this presents a relative amount of logistics and concept operations. But it corresponds to what Ryan just said. I think it also has some game of relativity of what do you relate to when you are out there. On the moon, it's quite easy. On Mars, it becomes a little bit difficult. And there's a phase that we need to go through to be able to stay on Mars and still relate to Earth in a way, which again goes back to analog missions that can serve as a platform to do this.
All right, for me, the most interesting picture is probably this one on the left. So seeing the Earth disappear from Mars, and in terms of human factor, of course, psychologists and human factor experts are quite puzzled about what will happen to the crew that will lose the sight of our home base. And it also makes me think about my time at Lunares, because indeed we had no access to daylight, so quite similar. And also I think about the CAVE program from the European Space Agency that some of you might know. It's a kind of analog, but conducted in underground caves in Sardinia and Romania sometimes, if I'm correct, or Lithuania. And the concept is mainly astronauts and even US astronauts train for spacewalk inside those caves. So it's a question of what is an analog and how can you simulate the disappearance of Earth from your side.
So Leszek discussed inward introspection, identity. Ryan spoke of how to bring our best selves as we move away from our planet Earth, our home, or our spaceship. Gal talked about finding relationships. Then you talked about light, which leads into my next question. During analog missions, how does one keep an unbiased and an open perspective to the experience of, space exploration, really working to explore other worlds?
Yes, for me, during the analog, it was a question of simulation, which is very important. And I guess a lot of people in the audience are maybe engineers or scientists. And my background is in social and human science. and art. And I think that what can social and human science and art bring to the discussion is another perspective on what it means to be immersed in a simulation. When I asked some of my colleagues during the mission if they felt as if they were on Mars or the moon, most of them told me, well, not really, because they were engineers, so they think in a very rational way. For me, based on my background, I can maybe mesmerize myself a little bit. And sometimes in all those analogs, I really felt as if I was on the moon. And I think that you can get much more accurate data if you think in that way. Maybe my take on that.
Can you repeat the question for a sec?
So basically, hearing all your words, how does an analog or a person who's a space enthusiast keep an open-minded, unbiased perspective?
Frankly, it's quite difficult in analog to keep unbiased perspective, because eventually we all know that this is not the real deal. And I agree that imagination plays a part, but it's not enough. And one of the key elements in keeping unbiased is concentrating on what is in high fidelity in the specific analog that you are participating in. And by concentrating on this is immersing yourself in a very specific element of the analog. In a lot of cases, this will be the social composition of the team that you're working with, or in longer analogs, the psychological process that you are experiencing while being immersed in an analog mission, or, for example, in more engineering oriented analogs, trying to immerse yourself in the engineering challenges or opportunities that are presented to you. So concentrating on the specific high fidelity elements of an analog will be the right way to keep yourself biased.
Thank you, because due to your, definitely respond.
Oh, okay. Just wanted to throw in, because these are words that were kind of mentioned this morning in pieces, is just flexibility, adaptability of what's around you. And that helps with the being unbiased. And you also have to have, as even Grant pointed out, emotional intelligence, because even if you're not immersed in it, there are people around you might be, and you have to give them a chance to explore what that means to them without just jumping in front of them saying you're being silly or your behavior is not the standard behavior, because it really is different for everyone, but it takes that group that's there together to really get the most out of the experience. So there's kind of you have to be kind of aware of what's the other people are going through as well.
Just add that no matter who you are, all of our biases, and we all have them, they're all learned behaviors. And it can be very difficult to unlearn a behavior, particularly when you're under stress. So in an analog, you're short on sleep, maybe the food's not great. When people get stressed, they naturally fall back onto their learned behaviors. So for all of the analog missions in which I've participated, I found that it's helpful to be very mindful of what your own assumptions and biases might be, and try to approach things almost like you're a kid in a new neighborhood where you don't know the rules. Children are some of our best scientists because everything's new to them, and they approach things eyes wide open and without bias. So keeping that type of mentality and flexibility can be successful in an analog environment and probably anywhere else too. So that's another thing. The behaviors and the adaptability that you learn by participating in an analog is something that you can take with you everywhere.
Mark?
Yeah, I wanted to say to these images that what really strikes me is that only one of them, that distant view of Earth, shows a life support system that will sustain us. And, for me, the real essence of analogs is the interview. And I think you have Frank White participating. The overview effect has been very powerful in changing our perspective. But but the thing about analogs, whether they're highly technical or, more biospheric like Biosphere 2 was, is that you are creating a new situation where you're going to have to cooperate with people. You're going to have to, learn your technical systems. If you have life elements, you're going to have to cooperate with that. And it gives both the participants and the inspiration to other people on Earth, looking at these analogs playing out, that here are people who are charged with recreating a life support system such as we've been gifted by the evolution of planet Earth. And I think that's very, very powerful. I think it has the potential of really uniting humanity, because when you get to this kind of perspective of, oh, well, planet Earth isn't just the third, planet from the sun. It is our life support system. And every spacecraft that goes out there has to, use technology to replace the functions of our living system. So that inner view, and I don't know, yeah, we don't want to be biased, but, I think humans do have a bias that we want to survive and we want to have happy lives and we want to cooperate with other people.
Yes, thank you. As we enter the next slide, and listening to your words with high fidelity, flexibility, emotional quotient, so emotional capabilities, learned behavior, going through analog missions, what were your experiences and contribution? Well, I messed up. No, I'm okay. As analogs, I always have a lot of notes. So what were some of your experiences as you went through these analogs, especially when they were in extreme environments? And this particular slide is from Ryan, and knowing about unbiases, taking into account learned behavior, engineering, flexibility. What did these extreme environments help you?
Yeah, so this is the one slide slideshow. So I've been part of 6 different analogs, and that's 5 different times at the Mars Desert Research Station, and then part of a 100-day simulation at the Flashline Mars Arctic Research Station on Devon Island. So the picture here, the bigger one in the background, that's me crawling out of the crater. So this is on the rim of the Hodden Impact Crater. And just the experiences of different things that you can do there besides participation. Just a lot of this was through academic, but there's a lot of ways that industry is looking at being involved as well. So in top right corner, that's actually from my former lab, the suit lab at Embry-Riddle, where we're doing range of motion activities. But all that fed into who we can see here, one of our stars of the show here, Cyan, actually doing similar testing remotely at high seas. The bottom left is high seas from the first mission, I believe. The one next to it is Amity 18. And then the list goes on. We were involved with a mission in Nepal, like remotely. So there's ways of bringing research and activity to all these different things. And you can see the big question mark there is that I'm not done, but I don't know what the next thing is. But all of these experiences, living in an extreme environment, I mean, it was a 100-day simulation, but we actually lived in the Arctic for 4 months. It was all of May through August. So 15 years ago today, we were about to lock the doors for 101 days. It's a 100-day operational mission because we actually went on Mars time for 39 Earth days. So we were able to do that because there's 24 hours of sunlight. So we got to choose how to operate, and we boarded up the windows, adding 39 minutes every day. And so these are the different types of opportunities that we can expose analog research to. And I'm happy to talk on that, but I'll pass the mic for sure.
Yes. Anyone else want to share your experiences in a harsh environments and how it helped in keeping unbiased and thriving in humanity?
Well, when you're in harsh environments, you actually focus on the very specific immediate needs that you are required to fulfill, which is your need to survive, need for shelter, need for food, need for water, whatever it will be. And also having like a mission while trying to survive those harsh conditions, this is something that allows you to also to focus on another aspect, an added value for your survival. It gives you a reason to sustain yourself in those harsh conditions. This has been true during military service. This has been true in humanitarian operations. This is also true in analog missions, and it also quite true for space, actual space exploration.
Mark, I don't want to leave you out.
Yeah, I'm not sure that Biosphere 2 is a harsh environment. I mean, we did have the calorie restricted diet, which was a stress, and the slow climbing of a mountain because of the oxygen decline, and the isolation of just 8 people for 2 years. So I think it does qualify as an isolated, confined environment, one that I hope someday we will recreate in space. And you know, I've thought about this obviously for the last few decades. And the hopeful message that I get is, first off, we had a power struggle, which eventuated in a change in the management and even ownership of Biosphere 2. Columbia University came in, and that polarized the crew. But the fact that we were all so someone said before, this mindfulness, when you have created or you've stepped into an unusual situation, is extremely powerful. And in Biosphere 2, that realization was that living world was our health, our life support. So we never had any subconscious sabotage of each other's work, and it was really unthinkable that anyone would do anything to harm the biomes in our farm and our living space in Biosphere 2. And I think that's a really powerful message, especially in these current times when we're, so much of our world population is suddenly becoming aware of that we have pushed the Earth in really, really dangerous directions: climate change, loss of biodiversity, loss of wild animals, on and on and on. So I think the realization that you're all in it together, which is so powerful for any group in any kind of an analog, I think this is the message that we're beginning to get as Earthlings.
So listening to different ways of communication styles for survival, as well as being mindful of the environment around you, what would you say, as you underwent your analog research activities, how did it increase the number of, another way to say it, how did the research increase or have a major effect with people around you? So like your work, how did it benefit others on planet Earth or beyond?
Well, our individual work is limited in its effect in a way, but I think as a whole group of analog astronauts, each has its own little effect. Together we are creating quite a lot of knowledge in general, but also we are creating an awareness. We all know that the Apollo mission, the Apollo campaign, has ended by shifting budgets to low Earth orbit missions, because awareness and interest in planetary exploration has, by the decision maker, has dissolved. And in a way, the analog missions are a way to keep the awareness and keep the interest and keep the decision makers oriented to planetary exploration. It has an effect.
I have an engine nerd story about this that I'm pretty excited about from my work, was that during all these different analogs, part of how we told our story was also our research publications. So we're trying to get our work out there, and that was the best mechanism for that. And so one of our publications, led by Matt Bamsey, who's now the Canadian Space Agency, was a water study. And so his water study basically outfitted every single pipe at FMARS for 4 months with water usage, and we would, log as well on pen and paper who was using, I wouldn't call it a shower because it was once a week, but the sponge bath bucket of water, who used it. So every single drop we tried to account for. And so where it had an impact was that one of my favorite documents as a life support engineer is the BVAD, the baseline value assumption document. And so now in BVAD, there's a reference to that paper about how a crew can actually utilize water during a long duration mission. So there's the work that people do, like make sure you think about how you want to document it and where you can share it. Besides obviously the fun stuff that's online immediately, or videos that might last a long time, but because there's a bunch of them out there from all the different analogs.
Totally agree. We also are measuring water usage from every single pipe, and crews are competing with each other to see which crew will save the most water or produce the most gray water or find the perfect solution for showering in order to produce gray water, in order to flush your toilet. And what is super important here, that it stays with some people and they are more mindful of their resources once they leave the simulation or the analog habitat. And some really change their habits for a very, very long time. This is very encouraging to see. Probably Mark experienced that as well because he was living in a real isolated biosphere. But even on this small scale, it is very, very visible.
Okay, so I have this particular slide up there, and we actually could see how the bioregenerative life support systems evolved in analog facilities. So here we are. And this is just a great example of how far analog missions progressed in technology, sustainability, and preparation for space missions. But the question now is about the human factor, humanity. Have you seen any progress in that particular area?
So I will start with the history. You know what the first analog mission was? It was in 1969 in June. Few days before Apollo 11 started the journey, Wernher von Braun, well, there was a mission prepared by whom? By whom? No, by Picard, to travel along in a submarine along the Gulf Stream, and Wernher von Braun put one of his engineers into their crew in order to observe how they behave on this couple-week journey on a small area. At the same time, people were traveling to the moon, and it was a study done to prepare for longer excursions to the moon. That never happened, but it is considered the very first analog missions, and it was only one person looking how people behave during an actual expedition, because it was analogous, or it was analog. It could be an analog to a space mission, and from there, it was Biosphere 2, then MDRS in 2000s, and then Moscow, so Mars 500 facility. Hera was constructed somewhere around that time, or even earlier. I don't know. I don't remember. And then there's this big expansion and in variety of analogs starting in in the middle of 2010s, I guess, and now. And most of them now have their very different flavors. So there are those habitats that are focusing on biological systems. There are those that are focusing on people, on behavior. There are those that are technological prototypes that are trying to deal with system engineering. And there are some that are trying to do everything, or maybe not everything, but they're trying to bridge this gap like Sam is now trying to do. And I am really, really looking forward to see how that will go.
I like to say the perfect analog, and I've said this for 15 years, is that you would send a crew to the Arctic for a year, or actually you would launch them to the ISS for 6 months. That's their transit to Mars, and you drop them into the Arctic for a year or two, and then back up to space, which we're gonna have to work on our northern launch systems, back to the ISS for 6 months. The only thing is with all that, during those 6-month missions, you need to actually block out the window so they're not actually looking at Earth. So that's what it's going to take to like really experience the analog of a Mars mission within our own backyard. I think we're a little bit further from that, but the ISS in itself really is designed as a Mars analog. I mean, 6 months is there because that's roughly the transit time that we're targeting to get crews to Mars. And so a lot of that is the looking at the human factors and looking at the physiological changes that they undergo and how we can mitigate all the issues that come up and make it more available for anyone, hopefully one day, to be able to go by learning with these, these specimens, these perfect astronaut specimens. So.
Yes, and also like quick history as well. It's true that at the beginning of the Apollo program, NASA wasn't so much interested into psychology. It was much more about finding test pilots and put them in a tin can, and that's it. And of course, nowadays for future Mars mission, the paradigm has shifted. And even as we say back in Europe for ESA, the type of people we are looking for as astronauts, they change the type of people we are looking for. So it's overachiever, but hyper sociable at the same time, which is not always so easy to achieve.
Mark, as you were going through your analog missions and designing, was sustaining and nurturing humanity an important component of it?
Yeah, I mean, we were not under any illusion that it was going to be easy for a small group of people to live isolated physically. I mean, we had the best communications of the early 90s, so we were not in the North Pole or anything like that. But I have to say, I had lived for many years in the outback of Australia, and living in the outback of Australia, you could drive around and go to a pub and meet lots of Australians, semi-drunk, drunk, sober occasionally. So Biosphere 2 was not, to my mind, the ultimate test of isolation. But I did want to kind of emphasize, because I'm really in awe, you panel of people, and probably a lot of the people in this room have done really extraordinary things. And I just feel like I have a bias because I'm kind of a greeny kind of guy. I'm an ecological engineer. I got inspired to do sewage treatment because of the system we had inside Biosphere 2. But to me, bioregenerative life support system is kind of the game changer to making it real that we can actually go into space and not have to have really expensive and dodgy and dangerous resupply from Earth. And I think it's because I've been invited, and I know a lot of the Chinese researchers, that the work that's being done by two groups in Beijing is just astonishing. It is like what the Europeans and Melissa are still, after 30 years, trying to implement. They've actually had closures of 2 and 3 people for a year, growing virtually all of their food, raising insects, the other Asians that are part of the recycle system. And there's another group at the Chinese Astronaut Center, a little bit more secretive. When I was there with some colleagues, we were some of the first non-Chinese people to actually see the life support systems. And I just have to say that I think that bioregenerative life support has always been kind of the ugly duckling of the space agencies that are dominated by technologists and engineers and are really fixated on short-term objectives. But if we don't like really learn how to grow food in space and how to generate oxygen, clean up air, take care of our waste, we're going to be basically space tourists. So I'd like to just put my 2 cents in that it's not only crucial to our future in space, but the bioregenerative life support system, when people actually understand, and it can be in a really simple, scale down. I mean, Biosphere 2 was quite exuberant about how we would eventually live in biospheric systems. It also resonates with people's lives. We have this incredible and crunching water scarcity, and the absence of good, clean drinking water and proper hygiene. Air quality is now, it's not just fossil fuels, it's that what the UN just said, 98% of the people on Earth, I'm here in New Mexico, breathing really bad air from wildfires that are a consequence of climate change. That the bioregenerative aspect to space analogs and to space exploration is really the connector that will make our steps into space make sense to people and inspire them. When we started Biosphere 2, we thought it was going to be a quiet research project. We were going to make our money back by selling one to London or Tokyo or Euro Disney, etc. But there was something about that project and people being able to get their minds around what a small biosphere is and how people and farming are integral to it, that generated incredible interest. Anyway, that's kind of my bioregenerative analogs are super important. And, I've met some people like from the high seas, and it was just always striking to me. We had those problems on the Moscow 500 day, and I don't even believe that they had any house plants in there. I've spoken to some people who were at the high seas, and at least they had some plants. And I've heard the reports, because I know a lot of Soviet, well, now Russian researchers, about how cosmonauts and astronauts, they really bond with a few experimental plants in space, even if they're not gardeners on Earth. And I think that's the key that really will generate the kind of public support so we can actually get money into space exploration.
Thank you. Yeah, I hear all the humanity challenges, but we've been using the word humanity, and you notice that the 3 slides are up again. So now is the question, and I have the audience also figure out your own definition. How would you define humanity? One slide back. There we go. How would you define humanity? How would you define humanity in space? And this is to the whole panel.
Right, so for the question of humanity and keeping human into space, I have one take on that. That one of my colleagues, Valeria Olson, she's an anthropologist, and she was an intern at NEMO program, and she explained in her essay that astronauts are in fact a system that enter into systems. So until recently, until we will go to Mars, to go to Leo, an astronaut is a system that needs to fit into other systems to be part of the whole operation. So of course, in this sense, you lose a bit of humanity in the process. You are an operator, but for sure, for future Mars mission, because the crew will need to have much more autonomy for many different technical reasons that my colleagues know probably much more than myself. I'm pretty sure that the crew selection will be much more based on the humanity side of people. And my other example about what is humanity, I've been to 20 degrees from the North Pole in a boat, and I have some colleagues here who also has done the same experiences, and I can tell that crew selection is very important. And quite quickly, when you are on a Zodiac boat in the Arctic Ocean, you can feel the people who would throw you in the water if they need to survive, and the one who would help you to survive. That's my take on that.
Humanity it's a singular form for species, and we know that humanity here on Earth is quite divided. Races, ethnicities, nations, genders, social, economical divisions, and I guess asking what's humanity in space, the answer will be what I would want humanity to be in space, which is to be something more united. And I agree that there's a huge opportunity in humanity in space in getting human beings united around a single notion, a single understanding that they're originating from somewhere out there, and we are just a small part of this entire existence. However, there is a challenge to this, and an example for this will be, I guess most of us are familiar with the first private mission to the International Space Station that just occurred, that was used to have teams with a very clear, I would say, culture of work. They were coming there for a month of time doing different experiments. And suddenly a new group with a different agenda, with a different time frame, with their own things going on, entering the space station. And I wonder what kind of tensions have happened there. And I wonder how the fabric of humanity in the International Space Station has been interfered with when two groups with totally different agendas have entered. So I would say humanity in space will be something considered not as a situation, but something we strive to do, something we engineer in a way we wanted to see it. And considering that the Maslow pyramid is actually not a pyramid, but a leveled hierarchy of needs, all had to be addressed in parallel to construct an operational and functioning society, which will be one humanity.
So this is a hard question, and I'm gonna answer that with I don't know, but I'm gonna say why I don't know. So I've been working in human spaceflight for 20 years. It's my passion. It's what I want to do. But the industry is changing. It changes all the time. Right now, he nailed it with the Axiom 1 flight, is that this is not the government and the majority voters and the representation that everyone wants to see being selected and chosen to flow in space. These are people that have brought themselves together saying, we're going to do this, and they found their opportunity. So we might be at a crossroads where the selection of people in space might be going out of our hands because of the way commercial business might drive it. So it's definitely something that we need to be aware of and keep in mind for the bigger picture of large scales, colonies and everything else that we'd love to see. But the balance is something that we have to keep in mind as well, of the type of people that might want to, or might be going because they have the means to go.
I would say that humanity in space would be more humble, more thoughtful, and maybe more mature. It very ties in nicely with overview effect, but I'm really thinking about the fact that they really need to survive on very scarce resources outside of Earth, and that creates the same, maybe not emotions, but the same results that you learn how to behave and not to use your resources to it teaches you to use your resources wisely. So I hope that it will be the case, but I don't know.
So when I think of humanity, I think of, well, it's the people, of course, but it's also our collective culture and history. It's our technological achievements, but also our music and art. All of those things wrapped together define what it means to be human. And in another sense of the word humanity, it focuses on how we treat each other, hopefully with compassion and understanding. Sometimes we do a better job of that than others. But my hope for what humanity in space would be like is that, like some of the other panelists have said, it would be more intentional, that we take those best learned lessons from our thousands of years of being humans on Earth and try to pick the best and focus on those for whatever we create in space. Space doesn't really have humanity yet, its own thing, but I'm hoping for something better. And as some of the other panelists have said too, I think there are very valuable lessons that we learn from analogs that can help inform us about what humanity in space ought to be. Two of the biggest lessons that we learn in any analog environment, number one, managing scarce resources. Number two, managing relationships between and among people. Well, if we could just apply those two lessons to humanity here on Earth, I think we'd all be a lot better off.
That snaps, right? Anyone else? Mark?
Mark,
Yeah, and unfortunately, I need to leave, so this will be my final pronouncements. I really try to be positive because I think we can't afford to be despondent or in despair about both our situation on Earth and our prospects in space. And I do think that going into space is going to be a very profound evolutionary step for humanity. And like a few people have been saying, whether or not it's bioregenerative, you know, when you're in a life and death situation with scarce resources and a very fragile life support system, you are going to be extremely mindful. And I think long term, as we learn to live in space and bring our biospheric species with us to make that possible, we're going to evolve to what I'd like to call Homo ecologicus. We're all going to be ecologists because that's going to be a really important, vital, and almost imperative skill that we're going to have. And I'd also like to think about, you know, let's really think about what's going to happen in space. Well, how species arise is by isolation and small populations. So I think the really exciting thing is that, you know, there are no endpoints in evolution, and we are not the crown of creation. And if we and our biospheric colleagues, other species, we have to take with us, including our internal microbiome, we're going to evolve in space. Humanity is not going to stay the same. And with that, I leave my distinguished panel.
Thank you, Mark. I'm being mindful of time. I know this discussion, when we've been collaborating, we kept on developing new ideas and hopes for our future. So on this slide behind me, you see that some of the how we want to address some of the concerns and challenges. And some of our topics when we're meeting is the enthusiasm of space, space capitalism, unions, equitable inclusive access, code of ethics. What's our call to action when you hear all this? Anyone could take it. I give you, I know, because then the next slide is that we have had many accomplishments as analogs. But let me go to the previous slide, so he's still processing.
Yeah, and I don't know if we'll have time to do questions too.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
we can really get the feedback here. But yeah, these were big questions and big topics, and our panel got to meet, was it 3 times as a group? And so there was a lot of conversation, and so those were basically our bullet points on the top level things that really people were passionate about. And so when Jessica gets here, definitely talk to her about these topics as well.
Yes. So just so we can have time for Q&A. So as we look at the next slides, we can actually see the accomplishments and the footprints of analog missions. So as we go into the next slide, we see inclusivity, diversity, equity happening throughout all our analog missions. In our next slide, we actually have data says, thank you to Leszek, if you want to add anything to this.
Yeah. Like in LERS, we had over 20 different missions, so over 100 participants. And it wasn't like it was by design. We were simply suggesting and asking different crews. But it happened that we got the gender parity when it comes to representation of genders, which I really think that is very encouraging. Now we have But also that's not only thing, because we are talking about those biases, and analog missions, especially in those not extreme environments but controlled ones, when you can test things, allows you to challenge some ideas. Here we can see an Icarus 1 mission that happened in 2017 with an engineer that a couple of years back was hurt by an explosion, lost 2 eyes, an arm, and most of the fingers in the other hand. And it was a simulation what would happen to a regular Mars mission if someone suffered a major accident. And that, and the straight, like the chain of events and for this research followed with a very nice paper in Science magazine by our doctor and very well-known analog astronaut Christiane Hennicke about disability in space. That in fact, yeah, something can happen, but also you can use people with disabilities in space to like your advantage. Like in 0G, for example, if you are amputee, you don't have disability, you have hyper ability because you don't lose your muscles there, because you weight less, because you eat less calories, and you become hyper able to perform different tasks. So ESA is doing this kind of, and NASA are doing those investigations in allowing people with disabilities to go into space, and that not only started with analog missions, but they also allow that to challenge those biases, for example.
Anyone else? I just want to make sure we have Q&A. All right. So definitely there are tons of opportunities, but here's our space to ask questions and also lead into discomfort on how we can improve humanity. And please follow our panelists. So Q&A. Any questions, comments, concerns, hopes, dreams?
Hi, thank you so much. I have a comment about the slide where you had challenges of inclusion, equity,
yes,
and ownership. If we could go back to that slide. I think there's a big thing happening now when we look at the one before with the questions, because when we go on a lot of calls happening now, just in general with space policy, etc. And this is coming up, this issue of ethics and ownership and the new laws about mining, etc., which we're not touching here, but I think that's part of the ecosystem. And I just want to point that I found out that Mondragon, that with the biggest cooperative in Spain, has a success of years of running very well-run businesses. They own several companies. The whole town is run a cooperative, and nobody seems to know about it when I ask. And I'm wondering, how can a community like this, that are now looking at how the space ecosystem, look at a model like that and say, hey, they've been successful in democratizing ownership and making it successful from a business perspective. Can we get more of those stories amplified so that we can look at new models of ownership, new names for things, this Ubuntu question, I am because you are. If we're going to move into space, we need new language. So one of the words I'm trying to get the futurist community use is the idea of zoetic futures, which is life affirming, versus all this transhumanist, let's put things in our brains kind of things, futures that we seem to be dragged towards. And I think the space community can have this balance between recognizing that it began with astrology and astronomy, and now we're talking about a space economy, but we should not forget the other side of ourselves that makes us fully human. That humanity question, we should really have that intention, I think you said, to carry that with us forward.
The intentions, yes, anyone?
No, that was beautifully stated. I don't really have anything to add to so thank you for contributing that.
But her question is, how can we magnify that from Spain? Because I never even heard of it. Oh, but please share. That's what is the company name. Can you say the company name one more time? Mondragon.
Yes, this is something I only learned like a few weeks ago because I was reading a new book by Kim Stanley Robinson, the Minister for the Future, and he said that this kind of collaborative ownership of business, for example, or communities, could be a way to be more just in our on Earth, but an idea to introduce that in the future space and colonies. This is something that I never thought about, it would be wonderful to see how that would work. Maybe with an analog that would be not 6 people, so 6 person, but 20, 30, close in an analog of certain urban colony, and maybe we simply need to wait for another line of analogs that will not focus on small groups, but on small societies, and I would love to see that in the future.
Awesome.
I was just going to respond to that point. It's a really good point. It depends on who's doing the work, who's going to space.
And why?
And why? You know, if it's a private corporation that's sending people to space to mine resources and bring them back to Earth, you're going to end up with a very different culture and society and way of doing things than if it's more of a cooperative model. My hopes for expanding human activity into space will be something more of a co-op, where everybody who's involved and doing the boots on the ground work has a vested interest in the success of the enterprise. Because among other things, it forces people to be a bit more democratic and mindful of everybody else's contributions and responsibilities. A corporatist effort that has a very top-down hierarchical structure, for me, and frankly, it's something that scares me a little bit about space development. Would I want to live in a Martian colony run by SpaceX? I mean, I'd probably do it, but would it am I afraid that it would become somewhat dystopian? I think it's pretty likely that it would be, and I think we can do better. So your point is very, very well taken.
Just a quick response. There's a certain national space agency that I'm not going to say from where exactly, for their it was called the Agency for Space Exploitation. Now, one thing that we need to consider about the equality and the ability of opportunity for different cultures in space exploration is that different cultures and different societies can be exploited in producing businesses, for example, in other planetary environments. And one question I will ask myself, who will be the first culture who will be sent to space with no guaranteed return tickets? To do what exactly? For the benefit of whom on Earth?
Okay. One more question?
So to the point of society being an analog mission, we've been in a global pandemic for over 2 years now, and we went through this isolation period of being alone in our homes and going online with Zoom and Slack and all these tools, and I feel like we found the technology to survive the analog, to survive the isolation together. But as a practitioner and teacher of meditation, one thing I've noticed a lot these past 2 years is a thirst from a lot more people for more inner exploration, more guidance for how they can explore within themselves. And so I have 2 questions for all of you. One is, in your analog missions, did you have moments where you really felt the need to be just with yourself, to explore inside? And then maybe the larger question then is, how do you think we as a society should move forward, knowing that we do have that thirst amongst us in this large social pandemic?
Oh, am I muted? Used to the mute button. No, so the first part of that, during the 4-month analog, there was a point where I called it meet yourself that kind of happened to me, where I was definitely stressed. We were doubling up on EVAs because part of Arctic research is basically hunting the permafrost, and it was getting warmer, so the permafrost is getting lower and lower. And so we had to do 2 EVAs a day, and we were just completely burning ourselves out. And that was in June, leading into July, which is when we went on Mars time and everything kind of slowed down and relaxed. And so at that point, right in the middle, extremely stressed and just kind of sat back and kind of thought about like, wow, this is me at my worst. Like, this is like, I am miserable in a different way, but this isn't so bad. And it kind of had like that personal aha moment of, well, it's only 4 months. It's like doing an internship. Going through the academic life at that point was, this is an opportunity. There's only 6 of us or 7 of us up here. Not many people get to do this, and you kind of start reflecting on what's actually important. And I think that's kind of happened too a little bit in the pandemic, where you're like, the decisions you make, we have a lot more flexibility here. I picked up and moved my family in the middle of a pandemic from Florida to Colorado. And so we have those options through that. So we can learn from, what's of value, what's important for us to actually feel complete with where we want to go. And I think that applies to space as well.
Thank you. Anyway, I think we have to start closing up, but definitely this is a conversation we need to continue. Because I'm just looking at my...
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying. So thank you, my panelists. Thank you, my peers. I want to learn more about Moderator and your ideas, and have a wonderful day, because together we can do whatever we can do to better humanity. Thank you.